Unlike these towns, I just can't keep a secret from you guys, so sit back, listen up, and try not to freak out because some of these are gross. Once again, I will remind you that due to platform restrictions, there are some words and phrases that I cannot say, but as always, I have done my best to provide us with the best possible replacements. Starting off our list today, we have Athens, Texas, home to Reverend Fuller, who it seems took a dark turn the day the circus rolled into town. It is said that on that day, a wagon carrying a cargo of monkeys tipped over and the animals escaped into the woods, where some were later captured by Reverend Fuller. Locals tell that Fuller kept the monkeys in a cage on a plot of land he owned called Fuller Park, where eventually he began using them for highly unethical experimentation. It was said for years he tortured the animals until they eventually died and were buried on the land. Later, when Fuller passed, he and his wife were buried in the park as well. Many locals who had heard the rumors of Fuller's heinous acts went out to explore the land, driven by curiosity. Many also recounted that while exploring the area, they had found a series of entrances to underground tunnels, all of which eventually met up underground, forming the shape of a pentagram. It has also been said that the road leading into the park and the park itself, where the monkeys along with Fuller and his wife are buried, is extremely haunted. Not by Fuller's ghost, but rather the ghost of the monkeys who had to endure the unforgiving nature of Fuller's torture under the guise of scientific exploration. Next, we have the tragedy of McCarthy, Alaska, an event that took place in 1983, in which a man named Hastings had planned to wipe out the entire population of the small town. About 8 months prior to the incident, Hastings had moved to the small mining town that had a population of just 22 people. On February 29th, Hastings went over to his friend Chris Richards' home and fired 2 projectiles at the man. One hit him just above his eye and the other in the neck. Richards was, however, able to escape after defending himself with a kitchen blade and ran to get help. After firing at Richards, Hastings went to the airstrip where most of the town had gathered, awaiting the weekly mail delivery. He hit 7 individuals with projectiles from a handheld weapon. 6 passed and 1 suffered severe injury. When Hastings was eventually apprehended 30 kilometers outside of the town, he admitted that he had planned on taking out the entire population but was ultimately unsuccessful. He had also wanted to hijack the mail plane so that he could fly to Glen Allen, where he would steal a truck and blow himself up along with the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline pump station. Hastings was sentenced to 634 years in prison for his crimes. Next on our list today, we have San Jeronimo de Juarez, Mexico, a town with a population of just 7,300, in which Oscar Flores took the lives of 12 individuals, including a member of his own family. The incident started in the man's home, where he ended the life of his nephew with a kitchen blade. When police arrived on the scene, Flores was able to escape after he beat one officer with a large rock and stole the weapon off another. Flores then used that weapon to continue his violent rampage, firing at random people throughout the town. Eventually, the townspeople turned on Flores and began chasing him. While trying to outrun them, Flores lost the weapon he had stolen and somehow also lost his clothes. He faced off against the townspeople naked, armed with only a large blade, but when police arrived at the scene, they were able to successfully apprehend Flores, who was badly injured in the process and died in hospital not long after. After his death, it was discovered that 7 years prior to his final violent spree, Flores, who had a long history of substance abuse, had taken the life of his brother-in-law as well as 5 other individuals in Tijuana in the years prior. Next up, we have the 10-hour killing spree that took place in June of 2010 in the small villages of Cumbria in England. It all started early in the morning when 56-year-old taxi driver Derek Bird drove to his brother's home and fired 11 projectiles into his head using a handheld weapon. He then drove to the home of his family's tax agent, who he thought had been conspiring against him alongside his brother, and took the man's life in a similar fashion. After the incident, it seems as though Bird just snapped. He began driving through the villages and towns targeting fellow cab drivers. 1 died and 3 were injured before the police caught wind. Somehow, however, Bird was able to avoid capture. He ditched the cops and continued driving to the next town, where again he began firing at random people, ending the lives of another 9 men and women and injuring another 7. Eventually, out of gas and out of ammo, missing his vehicle's front tire, Bird got out of his car and began walking into the woods. An hour later, police located his body, and it was determined that the man, unable to live with his actions or perhaps face the consequences, had taken his own life. Next up on our list today, we have the small town of Luxiol, located in France and home to just 130 residents. In 1989, it was resident Christian Dornier who landed the town on this list after a mental break led him to a 2-hour killing spree in which he ended the lives of 14 individuals. While the reality of the incident was shocking, after the event took place, many of the locals admitted to having suspected such behavior was inevitable from Dornier. In fact, before the killings even took place, the town's council had suggested to Dornier's family that he should seek psychological help for his disposition. Unfortunately, the family did not listen to the council, and on July 12th, Dornier fired a handheld weapon at his sister and then opened fire on his mother and father. Dornier then got in his car, where he spent the next 2 hours driving around town, firing his weapon at anyone who crossed his path. He was eventually caught by police after sustaining an injury from an officer's weapon. Dornier did survive the arrest and went to trial, but he was never convicted for his crimes. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity. In 1991, Dornier was checked into a psychiatric hospital in France, where he remains to this day. Next up, we have the small town of Hungerford, England, population 5,000. On August 10th of 1984, yet another 2-hour killing spree occurred that caused the deaths of 17 individuals, including the assailant's family dog, and it also badly injured 15 more. The killing started around 12 p.m. when Michael Robert Ryan abducted a woman from a local park, took her to a secluded area, and fired 13 projectiles at her, ending her life. Michael then fled the scene and made his way back to his neighborhood. When he arrived at his home, he ended the life of the family dog with a projectile and then began loading up his car with handheld weapons. He tried to leave, but his car wouldn't start, so out of anger, he grabbed a can of gasoline, soaked the house, and set it on fire. He then began walking down the road, aiming at anyone he saw. When his mother arrived on the scene, she yelled out to her son, begging him to stop and asking why he was doing what he was doing. He took her life and then fled the area. He eventually took his own life in an empty building that had been surrounded by law enforcement after Michael had been spotted inside. The incident changed the history of England, as shortly after this took place, the country implemented much stricter weapons laws. Next on our list today, we have the unsolved mystery of the Bedford, Massachusetts highway killings. In March of 1988, in the small town, which now has a population of around 13,000, young women started to go missing. The disappearances went on for months, but no one could figure out why they were happening. It wasn't until July of that same year that some clarity began to take place, when the bodies of 9 out of the 11 missing women were discovered along the town's highway. It was revealed that the women who had lost their lives all had ties to illegal substance distribution as well as sex work. Authorities determined that foul play had led to the deaths, and a case was opened in the hopes of locating the remaining 2 missing women and apprehending the killer or killers involved in the deaths of the discovered 9. Unfortunately, neither were ever found, and to this day, the case remains an unsolved mystery that continues to baffle law enforcement and plague the small town of Bedford, Massachusetts. Next up, and starting off our top 3 today, we have the small town of Burke Canyon in Idaho. The town was founded in 1887 after rich deposits of silver and lead had been discovered in the area. The architecture of the town was strange, as it had to accommodate the fact that the town had been built inside an incredibly thin canyon, which at some points was only 300 feet wide, but they made it work. For a while at least, as just a few years after the town opened its doors, it became devastated by an avalanche, which was quickly followed up by a labor strike. A labor strike that ended in a standoff between the miners and the mine owners, during which a projectile accidentally set off a large amount of dynamite, which caused a mill to explode and ended the lives of 6 people. A few years later, disgruntled miners deliberately blew up another mill, claiming the lives of even more. The incident were followed up by 2 massive natural fires, a major flood, and another large avalanche, causing the fall of Burke Canyon, which is known today as nothing much more than a ghost town with some odd buildings and a very violent past. Next up, we have Attica, New York. If the town sounds familiar, it might be because you are vaguely remembering stories you've heard about the town's prison with the same name, which of course is what landed the small town on today's list in the first place. The Attica maximum security prison was home to many of the world's most infamous infamous criminals, including American killer David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam, who was responsible for at least 8 deaths, after which he consumed the flesh of his victims, and Mark David Chapman, the man who killed Beatles legend John Lennon. In 1971, the inmates of the prison, which had been known for its inhumane treatment of the prisoners, took control in an effort to negotiate for better living conditions. The state responded with extreme force, leading to the deaths of at least 34 inmates and 9 hostages. Okay, this last town is Baltimore, Maryland, and while it's not small, what happened there is definitely shocking. Have you ever heard of Joe Menthe? Well, if you haven't, listen up, and if you're eating, put it down. Joe Menthe was an American serial killer who claimed to have been responsible for violating and ending the lives of 13 separate individuals. If right now you're wondering what he did with the bodies of the deceased, I will tell you, but I'm not happy about it. He made them into burgers and served those burgers to members of the public at his roadside open pit barbecue stand. He was arrested after he asked a friend to help him dispose of a body he had been hiding in a warehouse for over a month. The friend obviously reported him to the police, and Joe was convicted of 2 killings despite confessing to 13. However, research did later confirm 3 more of his victims. Joe was sentenced to life without parole, thank God, and eventually died in his cell on August 5th of 2017 at the age of 62. That was gross, and I'm sorry, but you know the deal. If I have to read about it, you're gonna hear about it. I hope you enjoyed the video today, and I also hope you aren't watching this before bed, but if you are, good luck. As always, I've been your host, Hannah Thompson, and I will see you in our next video.